Two souls entwined, an eternal couple, by deity enshrined, the Estolian Way.
Indelible link, one to the other, connected forever, in life and in death.
The hardest part of my role in this iteration of the grand design has been to observe without interference. Krynos often comforted me as I watched the intricate swirling eddies of one anchor point of influence weave into the others. Despite our many past failures, Elora's emphatic insistence on moving forward with this iteration has proven to be the right choice. How could any of us have grasped the brilliance with which she perceived the endless possibilities? One by one, her predictions have come true, and even those elevated to the rank of major deity are awed by how this iteration differs from all that came before. Alanis, Elora, and Zenta have proven most adept at navigating the constraints of the grand design. Kalaria, musings on eternity.
Cathea sat beside the mossy rock, knees drawn up to her chest, eyes fixed on the bubbling green pond. She willed herself not to think. Picking up pebbles from the thick moss, she tossed them one by one into the water, each one sinking without a sound, a stark contrast to the usual rippling response of a normal pond. Then she threw a stick, and it landed with a splash, sending rippling waves across the surface before vanishing without a trace. Like her dreams, the future she'd never know. Leaning her forehead against her knees, she shut out the pond and the uncertain horizon ahead, wishing she could sink into the thick green depths like the stick. How had it come to this? Apollyon had invited her to ride in the sacred grove, eager to show her the hidden pond, a place not found on any map. She relished his company, her heart quickening at the mere thought of him. But that magic was now tarnished. Tears streamed down her cheeks, burning like fire. Apollyon was so handsome, so commanding, the future king, the one all of Estolia depended on for safety and happiness. His gaze had once sparkled with approval as he held her close, his body pressed against hers, the warmth intoxicating like the frothy top of a bucket of fresh milk. Yet in an instant it all unraveled. When he first pulled her to him, she had revelled in his favour, lost in the sensation of him. But then his hand slipped between her thighs, shattering the spell his kisses had cast. Just as she meant to protest, to remind him of boundaries, he kissed her fiercely, ignoring her resistance, the push of her hands against his shoulders. The weight of his body over hers was heavier than she could bear, and the pain felt akin to a sword piercing her heart. She stopped fighting as he grunted above her, the appeal of his face vanishing, replaced by something petulant and ugly. Hatred surged within her, coalescing into a dark resolve as he took from her that which she would never yield willingly. She despised his theft, her own inaction, and the deity who let it happen. When he finally rolled away, lying on the moss beside her, fury twisted in her heart, an urge to choke the life from him. Yet, beneath the storm of rage, a chilling detachment settled over her, as if her emotions had transformed into the stuff of legends, separate from her own broken heart and soul. He rolled his head to the side and looked at her with a grin that she once liked, that excited her imagination, and he said breathlessly,
"That was wonderful, Cathea."
He remained unrepentant in the face of her unrelenting recriminations. Cathea took a grim satisfaction in the exhaustive list of words she crafted to describe him, his actions, and her own tumultuous feelings.
"Cathea,"
he whined during one of her pauses.
"Paratarsus admitted it's all just superstition. There's no deity, no real keeping of the soul."
The scornful way he talked made Cathea fear for Estolia's future. How could the heir apparent so completely disregard the promise of Zacharias, refute the very way of life that defined Estolia? She believed in all the promises of deity that kept their society safe. As she hugged her knees and gazed at the slowly bubbling green surface of the pond, she replayed in her mind, yet again, the conversation they'd had before she told him to leave her alone. She knew that there would come a day when he'd pay for his crime against her. Time seemed to stand still around her, and she had a vision of him clutching his throat as a crimson tide flowed between his fingers, pouring from a fatal wound. In her vision, he pulled an unknown woman into his arms before they both collapsed, blood gushing from slit throats. With a conviction more profound than any she'd ever felt in her life until now, Cathaya knew Apollyon would never wear the crown of Estolia, never be king. She raised her head from her knees. The pond gnats swarming in the air over the green, bubbling pond had suddenly halted in their flight, hovering still and motionless. Alarmed, she sprang quickly to her feet, scanning her surroundings to determine what had changed. Standing just behind her was an older woman, her hair silver, her face unlined by age.
"Hello, Cathaya,"
she said softly. Cathaya flushed a deep scarlet, mortified. The woman must have seen what transpired in the clearing just moments ago, witnessed what Apollyon had done to her.
"Purity is not about virginity,"
the woman said.
"It is about a purity of soul."
Cathaya shook her head, rejecting the offered solace.
I was as involved as he was to begin with.
She insisted.
"What do you want, Cathaya?"
The woman asked. Her wants and her needs crystallized.
I do not wish to be any man's Kaylee, to be defined by any man.
Her anger towards Apollyon still burned hot within her breast.
"If you wish this, then your destiny will be apart from Estolia.
The woman said, her expression unreadable.
Your personality, your strength within, would have always rejected the symbiosis of a typical Estolian marriage. I would have wanted you to learn this lesson in a gentler way, but Apollyon had a different idea."
You?
Cathaya looked at the woman closer. She didn't know her.
My vision earlier, was it real?
"Yes, Cathaya. If Apollyon does not mend his ways, he will ultimately reject everything that Zacharias stood for, and as a result, he will risk being made to pay for his actions."
The last resort.
She said. She had seen the future. She prayed that Alexandros would have the strength of character to fulfill his destiny. While she rejected much of the Estolian way, she still loved the land of her birth and could not bear to see it destroyed.
Your gift is the ability to see how actions today beget consequences tomorrow. Not the certainty of absolutes, but the potentialities that exist, the reaction for each action. If you wish to make use of your talent and forever be your own person, rather than defined by a union with one man, then your future lies away from Estolia's shores. In Palmyra, as a priestess, a seer, a woman clearly touched and influenced by the will of the seven gods of Centrath, you will find significant and meaningful happiness. If this future appeals to you, I will be your guide. Know this, Cathaya, you can still be a man's Kaylee if you wish. If you embrace this alternative pathway, it must be an active decision on your part, a choice you make based on what you want for yourself, not a choice based on the actions of Apollyon or a flawed perception of unworthiness.
Cathaya would choose to be responsible for herself. The sun had breasted the hill, brightening the landscape of her future. Her eyes met the woman's. She was conversing with Deity.
I am Deity. You will continue to be one of my subjects.
Cathaya could suddenly see her own future. Her hand fluttered to her abdomen, and she said with wonder,
I will conceive.
You will bear Apollyon's son.
Deity said to her.
The day will come when your descendant will keep the soul of the king. She will have the future that should have been yours if Apollyon was not plagued by immaturity.
Will I see you again?
The older woman smiled but did not answer.
Ask Helman to give you safe passage to Palmyra. He will leave in 2 days at dawn. I will be with you, Cathaya, every day of your long and eventful life.
Together our leaders, the stray are on. With the transition, bring us to Torazon. Kahkaha, gönüller uçar. Birlikte şahiney, ne harika bir manzar. O hayatta olmaktan mutluyum. Her vuruşta neşeleniyor. ve berrak gökyüzünün altında bu anda.
As I prepared my thoughts prior to writing in my inscrito, the future capitulo, I couldn't keep from thinking about my beloved Lynx. I saw her aura for 11 long months, during which I had to stifle my impatience to consummate our union. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, yet also the most rewarding, to fulfill the promise that Zacharias made to Deity and assure the safety, health, and well-being of my people for another capitulo. As I reflect on this sacred duty, I am humbled and awed by the 89 prior kings of Estolia who were each able to keep the promise of Zacharias. Their unwavering dedication to our people serves as a testament to the enduring strength of Estolia's noble lineage. Tiernan Augustus Zacharian, Capitulo 90.
Geniş ve berrak gökyüzünün altında bu anda.
The sweet sound of a song in the language of Palmyra wafted from the back room to where Cathaya sat in the outer room. Uriah was the extraordinary compensation for the life she now led. She closed her eyes and leaned back in the chair. Uriah's birth had been rough, and she knew without being told that her body would never quicken again. From the time she arrived in Palmyra, she was guided into a position of great power. Gannet took her in, claimed her child as his, though they had no ceremony to call themselves wed. Whenever she thought about Gannet, she felt sorrow at his death. He was probably the only man she would ever love, or who would ever love her. When they met, he had lived more than twice her own lifespan, but he had accepted her and her gifts from Deity with equanimity. 8 years after her son's birth, Gannet started to fail. She used much of the healing lore she learned from her uncle Estolian to try to ease his distress. Over time his condition deteriorated, and she knew he would not be with her for much longer.
Since I was a child,
He wheezed one night.
I've had a most difficult time with the lungs. I can tell that they will fail me very soon.
She sat by his side in their elevated bedchamber, kneeling on the soft sheepskin by their bed.
What can I do to soothe you?
She asked him. She had no remedies for this type of ailment.
The vial.
He said softly. She was transported in that instant to one of her most vivid memories. She was with Gannet 3 years, and young Uriah was already walking and talking, weaned and wanting to be a wizard someday, like his father. They were preparing the evening meal together, when the entrance to their home grew dark.
Is this the home of the Divinatra Cathaya?
A gruff voice inquired. Cathaya looked from the silhouette of the stranger to Gannet. She felt peculiar, as if danger was approaching. The expression on Gannet's craggy face was as implacable as ever, but the swift glance he spared her told her he felt it too.
Aye.
He said, affecting the crude speech of the coastal folk.
What be your need?
The man came deeper into the cavern, and Cathaya recognized him. Duke Ortega's new advisor, Solier, a foreigner who had done little to solicit welcome from the townsfolk. The foreigner saw Cathaya kneeling before their low table, setting out plates. His expression was familiar. The look of greed and lust on his face and in his eyes was reminiscent of Apollyon, imagining her beneath him as he rutted over her. She set the plate she was holding on the table and put her hand in her lap, clenching it in a fist, feeling the bite of her nails in the palm.
I've heard of Cathaya's beauty.
The man said to Gannet.
I've come to barter for her services.
She knew beyond doubting that this man intended to have her, and did not mean to pay for the privilege.
Wench, pour us wine.
Gannet shocked her with the command. She looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that quelled her fear. He was not going to give her up to this man, no matter how willing he was to discuss the possibility. She nodded and rose to her feet, crossing swiftly to one of their few cupboards. With a glance at Gannet, she saw that he agreed with her selection of the Danieli wine. She uncorked the bottle and poured 2 small glasses, setting them out on the table. When she looked at Gannet, something seemed different about him. She did not try to puzzle it out at once because the foreigner crossed the room and touched her face. She stifled the desire to reach to the dagger she always kept concealed in a sheath on her inner thigh, and just looked at him. In the language of the northern continent, Solier said,
Indeed, you are as beautiful as I was told. I shall enjoy ploughing your curves.
He did not look over at Gannet. He met her eyes and asked,
This is Cathaya?
Aye.
Gannet said.
And what be ye willing to give me for her?
His eyes lingered a moment longer before he turned back to Gannet, an expression of contempt only half concealed.
I have a pair of the large forest horses,
he said. Gannet looked out of the cavern to the two animals standing next to the saddled horse. He grunted and said,
Well then, let us drink to the trade.
With a glance at the pillows on the ground, Solier didn't bother sitting down. He took the wine and gulped it down, wiping the back of his hand across his mouth before reaching for Cathaya's upper arm.
Touch me and you die,
she said to him. He laughed and grabbed her arm. A moment later he staggered and then crashed to the ground. Gannet pulled her into his arms and held her as she trembled in reaction. Only once she calmed down did she look at Solier, dead, upon their floor.
I used the vial,
Gannet said. The vial? That was what was different about his appearance. The small glass vial, suspended from a slender golden chain about his neck, was gone. She had asked about it, and he had stated that it was how he kept himself safe. Now, she knew, he kept a poison within. He gave her a similar vial when he promised to care for her all the days of his life.
The only antidote,
he told her,
is the oil of Maybury.
They had discussed the poison, the antidote, and their future on that evening so long ago. Other townsfolk had come at Gannet's bidding, and it did not take long to prepare the foreigner so that his death would be explained. He was found, drowned, on the evening tide, and his body returned solemnly to the Duke. Later, Gannet taught her how to create the poison and how to fashion the vial using the cache of pure sand he kept in the depths of their cavern. As the mists of that memory cleared, Cathaya's eyes focused on Gannet's. She could see the wisdom and intelligence in his eyes. He understood what he was asking of her. If she did as he asked, she would be alone. Uriah would be left without Gannet's influence to help him.
Reach within yourself, Cathaya,
he wheezed.
You know this is the right choice, that you and your son will both flourish in my absence, even more than in my presence. Reach for your deity and accept what you are told.
The warmth of confirmation by Deity swept over her body. She was not sure about her future, but she knew that this was the most profound kindness she could give the man she took as a mate. After a nod of acceptance, she pulled the thin gold chain over her head, pulling the tiny purple vial up and into her hand. She stared down at it. Holding it tightly in her fist, she fought down the emotions of impending loss that were swamping her.
It is time, sweet Cathaya. Recall the certainty with which you see the future. Know that we will be blessed to be together again in your Tarizon.
She broke the wax seal on the vial before pulling the small cork from within it. Handing it over to him, she smiled at him, wanting his memory of her to be of a beautiful, proud woman with strength. He gave her his lopsided grin and then grimaced in pain. He sighed softly and then tipped the vial into his mouth. Handing the vial back to her, he said,
Rinse it thrice, then fill it with the Maybury oil.
He seemed ready to say more, but he was gone. So fast, so peaceful.
The Estolian Way, two souls entwined, an eternal couple by Deity enshrined, indelible link, one to the other, connected forever.
Sarai once asked me a question that threw me. She asked why we were blessed to live under and within the cloak of protection provided by Deity. My answer to her was inspired by the Spirit. We owe everything we have, every blessing in our lives, to the depth of faith Zacharias had in Deity, and the way he imparted that faith unto his people. No other man could have done what he did. Until my dying day, I will thank Deity for the faith of Zacharias, for choosing him to beget our nation. Valerius, Capitulo 11.
Consequences, the joy and the sorrow.
Alexandros woke from a restless sleep and opened his eyes to darkness. It was still some time before dawn, but he knew why he couldn't sleep. Seeking solace and advice with the rising sun was essential. The situation had grown intolerable. He slipped out of bed and dressed quickly. By the time he finished, a sliver of moonlight guided him through the quiet palace. With practiced ease, he navigated to the next wing and entered the main room. No need to check on Ulysses. He was already awake, surely roused by his connection to Deity, sensing that help was needed.
"I will follow you,"
Ulysses whispered. The two men approached the palace entrance. In the stillness of pre-dawn, they descended the stairs to the royal stable, home to the ruling family's personal mounts. Soon, they saddled their horses and rode down the palace road toward the base of Mount Zacharias. By the time they reached the valley between the mountains, the moon had set, leaving them in near total darkness. Alexandros rode a massive horse with a dark iron-grey dappled coat, while his friend's mount resembled a Corlean pony, small and dun-colored, unwanted by others. In the gloom, Alexandros appreciated the lighter hide of his friend's horse. They neared the summit of the lesser peak of Mount Estoliana when Ulysses spoke.
"What concerns you, Alexandros?"
He didn't want to put his fears and concerns into words. The sun was ready to rise above the horizon.
"Let's enjoy the dawn,"
he suggested, procrastinating. As the sun climbed higher, he tried to clear his mind of everything that worried him. He concentrated on the magnificent sight of an Estolian dawn. The two friends sat astride their horses, watching the dawn side by side. Once the colors began to drain from the sky, Alexandros slid off his horse and waited for Ulysses to do the same. As he dismounted, they both heard what sounded like the snapping of a twig.
"What was that?"
Alexandros asked. Ulysses gripped his saddle tightly. His voice sounded peculiar when he said,
"That, my friend, was my ankle. I believe we should seek out Estolian without delay."
Alexandros helped Ulysses back into the saddle, relief washing over his friend's face as his foot slid into the stirrup. He let Ulysses set a cautious pace. Both men wore grim expressions. As they traveled to the palace, Alexandros considered the palace healer. Estolian was the finest healer in Estolian history. After his acolyte year, he journeyed to Roma and Athens to study with esteemed physicians. Upon returning after 8 years, he was determined to serve within the palace. Deity rewarded his diligence and desire to serve by revealing the aura of Marta, one of the most pleasant souls in the palace. She thrived as a cook and later became the head chef in the palace kitchen, a perfect match for Estolian. Half an hour later, beads of sweat glistened on Ulysses' forehead. Upon reaching the archway leading to the grand entrance of the palace, Ulysses steered his steed away from the entrance and onto a minor track.
"You should follow on foot,"
Ulysses said. Aware of the narrow footpath, Alexandros complied. He dismounted, swiftly tying his stallion to a mayberry tree. Moments later, they rounded one of the stone buttresses supporting the palace, and the path ended at an iron-barred gate nestled within a small archway similar to the main entrance. The gate was shut and latched. Alexandros slipped past Ulysses and opened the gate. He was able to remain astride, ducking to pass under the archway. Once through the gate, Alexandros remembered to secure it again, mindful of the voracious island goats and Marta's potential wrath if they decimated her garden. Both Estolian and Marta were in the garden. A basket filled with root vegetables sat nearby, but the couple was engrossed in an intimate embrace, oblivious to the harvest. It was Marta who first noticed their arrival. She gave her husband one last tender embrace before whispering something in his ear. Estolian turned to face them, recognizing that something was wrong. He stopped briefly to relay his immediate needs to Marta before guiding Ulysses' horse closer to the palace entrance. Once the animal could go no further, Estryon and Alexandros assisted Ulysses to dismount. They carried Ulysses through the kitchens and to his father's wing of the palace, fortuitously only a short distance away. They carefully placed him onto his bed.
"You are right, Ulysses,"
Estryon said.
"Your ankle has broken. I must pull on it until the bones return to their correct places, and then we will wrap it so you cannot move it."
I bow to your expertise, Estolian, and to the will of Deity.
Ulysses' voice was muted by the pain he was enduring. A week later, Alexandros returned alone to the lesser peak of Mount Estoliana to watch the sunrise. His forebears had gained much wisdom and guidance from Deity by observing the dawn from this promontory. He longed for that same insight. Alexandros viewed his uncle Peritasis as an indifferent keeper. He fulfilled the position's requirements but missed its true essence. Often, Alexandros and Ulysses discussed the actions of former keepers and the promises of Zacharias and Deity. If only Ulysses hadn't broken his ankle, they could have discussed the developing situation. That was why Alexandros had invited Ulysses on the pre-dawn trek. Alexandros sighed heavily. For now he had to forge a path forward with only Deity as his guide. While Ulysses' ankle healed, his friend couldn't offer support. Alexandros prayed for guidance, seeking clarity and wisdom in his dealings with Apollyon. Apollyon was Alexandros' elder brother and the heir apparent. In 3 months he would turn 30. Apollyon frequently sought out younger, innocent girls from Estolia, tempting them to surrender their purity and robbing them of the chance for a lasting, soul-rich relationship. Their father had intervened, but Alexandros feared his brother might still make poor choices. Patriciala was clearly meant to be queen. Alexandros had seen her as the queen of Estolia in more than one vision. However, lately, every time he experienced his vision, it was drenched in blood, the blood of an heir unwilling to keep the promise of Zacharias, an heir who did not believe in the promises of Deity. If only he could turn to a more capable spiritual leader than Peritasis. Each time Alexandros contemplated Peritasis, he felt impotent, as if he faced an opponent at a duel but lacked a sword, outmatched by an adversary he didn't even know. The horse beneath him sighed heavily, and he closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, trying to control his fear and other emotions. He couldn't change the situation. He would reread the capítulos and ensayos and find his own way forward. There must be something hidden within the words of Amador or Valerius or Zacharias that indicated the correct way to handle an heir who didn't believe in the teachings of Zacharias. As the last resort, he must be willing to find that path, and then, once it was clear, he would need to follow it no matter which direction it led, even if it was beyond his normal abilities. He couldn't let Estolia fall. If his brother wouldn't do what was right, he, Alexandros Martavius, a descendant of Zacharian, would.
Deity's grand design, encircled with faith, sacrifice and drive, the promise of Deity, our faith rests on you.
No man can comprehend the sacrifices demanded of another by Deity if he has not himself faced similar demands. Anatoly, Capítulo 56.
As Alexandros finished sharpening his sword, A messenger arrived with a note from Ulysses asking him to visit at his earliest convenience. The formality of the request was unusual. His heart began to race as he reread the short note. It was Ulysses' writing, but lacked his usual flair. He felt a sinking sensation in his gut. Something was wrong. He set the note aside and hurried to Ulysses's quarters. He gasped when he saw Ulysses, a sick sense of foreboding tightening in his chest as he absorbed the changes to his friend's appearance. Only 2 days had passed since they last met, but now Ulysses had a deep crease between his brows and a muscle pulsed in his jaw. His lips were pressed together tightly, and the shadows under his eyes were pronounced. A chill gripped his heart. Ulysses, the only person who understood him, was dying.
Will you join me in a prayer to Deity?
Ulysses asked him. Alexandros nodded and closed his eyes, allowing the quiet stillness of the room to envelop him as he listened to his cousin's words. As Ulysses spoke, he felt inadequate once more, overwhelmed by the depth of spirituality radiating from him, especially when it was Alexandros who was meant to be the next keeper.
We say each of these things all within the light and sight of Deity.
Ulysses finished the prayer. Both men were silent for several minutes, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. Finally, he turned to Alexandros and said,
I believe, cousin, that you must fetch Estolian.
Alexandros met Ulysses' gaze and saw the truth reflected within his eyes. There was no hope for his foot. A wave of nausea twisted in his stomach as he closed his eyes, accepting the unspoken truth. Marta would know where to find Estolian, and with purpose he headed toward the kitchens.
Deity's grand design, encircled with...
Alexandros entered the bustling kitchen, scanning for Estolian. As he approached, he saw the healer tending to a yearling lamb in a small paddock, preparing for the evening's meal. The moment Estolian noticed Alexandros's urgent demeanor, he released the lamb, letting it scamper away into the safety of the pen.
My cousin requires your services,
Alexandros said to Estolian.
He and I both feel that his broken ankle will not heal.
Marta, who had accompanied Alexandros, shared a brief but heartfelt kiss with Estolian before stepping aside.
Come,
Estolian said, urgency in his voice as he led Alexandros back through the kitchen toward his spacious chambers. Engrossed in his task, Estolian deftly gathered an assortment of implements, offering a steady stream of explanation while he worked. This habit ensured that those around him always understood the purposes behind his actions.
We will need the 3 soaps of cleanliness, of course,
he said, sliding 3 jars into his bag.
Spirits infused with floral extract for pain relief, arnica for bruising.
He continued listing various medicaments, each one carefully chosen. As he began to close his bag, he paused, his brow furrowing in thought. A tap on the door preceded its opening, revealing a young acolyte.
Marta said you might need me to run an errand.
Estolian's expression shifted from relief to gravity.
Go to the stable level and find Cambric. Tell him he is needed in the quarters of the keeper, and that he must come immediately.
He met Alexandros's gaze, then added firmly,
And you are to go as quickly and safely as you can.
As his anxiety grew, Alexandros felt his mouth go dry and tension coiled in his neck and shoulders. He and Estolian approached the main stairway, his mind racing with questions that gnawed at him, leaving him deeply unsettled. What could Estolian do to save Ulysses? And what if he couldn't? Alexandros's thoughts drifted to the lamb Estolian had been ready to slaughter when he had disturbed him. Unusual in coloration, he would easily recognize it again. It was one of those rare 4-horned creatures, an aberration that the animal handlers sought to eliminate from the bloodlines. Perhaps they should embrace the unique traits of this patchy black and white 4-horned strain instead. He vowed fervently to Deity that if Ulysses survived, this male lamb, and all with the same characteristics, would be spared. A strange sense of relief washed over Alexandros in the wake of his vow, as if Deity heard him, accepted the offering, and would save Ulysses.
Sacrifice and drive.
When they reached Ulysses' room, it was obvious that word had spread throughout the palace. Ulysses' father, Peritasis, and his mother were already there. Moments later, Alexandros' own father, the king, arrived. Apollyon, Alexandros' older brother, was the only member of the Strellaran absent. As if he read Alexandros' mind, his father asked,
"Do you know where your brother is?" "No."
His brother did not like his movements to be tracked, and often left without explaining what his destination was.
Come.
Estolian gestured to Alexandros.
I will need your assistance.
The two men washed their hands in silence, repeating the ancient ritual 3 times with 3 different soaps of cleanliness. As they cleansed themselves, Ulysses' mother tended to his leg. Once they finished, they moved to Ulysses' side. Estolian examined Ulysses' leg and foot, nodding as he said,
"It is good that you came to get me."
The flesh appeared sickly, emitting a faint odor. Turning to Peritasis, he suggested,
"You may want to give your son a blessing. Also, he should have 3 glasses of my special wine."
He placed a small bottle on the table, along with 3 petite glasses. At that moment, Cambric strode into the room. He stood as the largest and strongest man in Estolia. Estolian beckoned Cambric aside, briefly indicating the bottle and glasses.
"It must be given without delay,"
he urged Peritasis. Peritasis reached for the bottle, but his hands shook uncontrollably. Stepping forward, Alexandros offered,
"Should I pour?"
His uncle nodded gratefully. As he wiped away tears from his eyes, Peritasis picked up the first glass and presented it to his son. Ulysses glanced at Alexandros, then at his mother and father, before taking the glass and downing the wine in one swift motion. He grimaced as the bold flavor and strength washed over him. Without hesitation, he consumed the second and third glasses just as quickly. After finishing the third drink, Alexandros placed the bottle and glasses on a side table. When he turned back, Peritasis handed him several items: parchment, ink, and a quill. With a newfound purpose in his voice, stronger than Alexandros could recall, he said,
"Will you be my scribe, Alex, while I give my son a blessing?"
The blessing Peritasis bestowed upon Ulysses was the most powerful Alexandros had ever heard. He felt the unmistakable presence of deity in every word, every subtle inflection. As his uncle pronounced that his son would endure this dire emergency, Alexandros' spirits lifted. Deity was with them. Cambric and Estolian approached. Normally, Cambric worked as a blacksmith, forging essential tools for farming, particularly crafting footwear to protect the sensitive feet of large draft horses, a unique practice in Estolia. His work with metals and those massive steeds had developed his natural musculature, making him an exceptionally powerful man.
"I believe,"
Estolian said to Cambric as they approached Ulysses, who lay recumbent upon his bed,
"that we must remove the foot."
He moved to Ulysses' side, feeling his pulse and gazing into his eyes, slightly dilated. Leaning closer, he caught the scent of his breath. Nodding to himself, he turned to the others.
"Except for Alexandros and Cambric, the rest of you need to step back to give us room to work."
Once they were at a distance from the others, Estolian turned to Cambric, elaborating on their plan.
"You have assisted me when a larger beast is slaughtered for a feast,"
he began.
"Your strength and skill with the broad axe are legendary. I've never seen you miss. Deity is with you, with us, and will steady your hands, guiding your strike to ensure it is precise."
He touched Ulysses' lower leg, just above the sickly-looking flesh.
"When I tell you, you must act swiftly. Your blow needs to slice clean through both bone and flesh in one motion. You've done this many times with cattle. Do you have the faith and courage to do it now, to save Ulysses' life?"
Cambric picked up his broad axe, gripping the handle tightly.
"I promise to serve Estolia, Deity, and Ulysses. My aim will be true and my work the finest I have ever done."
Alexandros felt a swell of pride for Cambric and Estolian. He knew the decision weighed heavily on both men. If called upon, he wasn't certain he could summon the courage to act. His focus shifted back to the healer as he continued to speak.
"Here,"
he said, gesturing toward the fireplace.
"I have several implements warming in the flames. I will stem the flow of blood and aid the healing process with heat."
He turned to Alexandros, his expression firm.
Your job, Alex, is to hold Ulysses' foot steady. Grasp it firmly and lean back, pulling on the foot. When cambric severs it, you will fall backward. Remain where you land so I can access Ulysses' leg and stem the flow of blood.
Forever after, Alexandros would remember the next few minutes with a clarity that haunted him. He promised to do his part and gripped Ulysses' ankle tentatively, fearful of causing his friend pain.
I cannot feel my foot. Its spirit has already fled.
Ulysses reassured him. Once Estolian was satisfied with Alexandros' grip, he signaled for Cambric to approach.
I'll be quick,
Cambric promised. And barely a heartbeat later, Alexandros found himself sprawled on the hearth, gripping his friend's diseased foot. The scorching spray of hot liquid on his face caught him off guard. The acrid stench of cauterized flesh hit his nostrils an instant later, making him want to retch. He swallowed hard and focused his attention on Estolian. There would be time for his own reactions later. Once Ulysses' leg was properly bandaged, his eyelids heavy with exhaustion, he drifted into an uneasy slumber. Alexandros, feeling the emotional weight bearing down upon him, rushed to his own chambers. The contents of his stomach spewed forth in a violent purge, a physical manifestation of his inner turmoil. As he wiped his mouth and washed the bitter taste from his lips, Alexandros couldn't help but wonder if he would ever feel complete again after witnessing such a gruesome spectacle. Then, in a sudden wave of guilt and self-recrimination, he berated himself for his own selfishness. After all, Ulysses would never be whole again, and the thought of his dear friend's lifelong disability weighed heavily upon Alexandros' conscience. Despite bathing not once, but twice, Alexandros could not shake the feeling of lingering uncleanliness. Plagued by restlessness, he made the decision to journey to the temple. He had not yet laid eyes upon his brother, and the sight of that lifeless limb, coupled with the scalding torrent of blood that had splattered his face, left him deeply unsettled. Only a few candles flickered in the oval ceremony room, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Alexandros approached the dais and knelt on the lone pillow placed there. A familiar sense of inadequacy washed over him. He wished Ulysses could be the next keeper. No man he had ever known seemed more suited to the role that he, Alexandros, was destined to inherit. He prayed for Deity's guidance through the trials he had faced and those yet to come. Only after he rose, feeling strangely rejuvenated, did he realize his prayers had foreseen some future challenge. He could only hope to be worthy of the faith Deity placed in him.
The promise of Deity, our faith rests on you. Deity's grand design, encircled with faith, sacrifice.
Promises of Zacharias lost in time. We're unbound by myths that rhyme. Together we'll rewrite our fate. Ahead of time we'll celebrate. Queen's crown awaits, as does my king. The future's ours, let the heavens sing. No fear for lore of priests gone past. In love and rule our legacy will last.
My nephew once asked me why I was always so angry. I write here within my audio the answer to his question. As with Kytheros, the keeper from over 1,000 years ago, I was blessed to see not one but two blinding aura. Identical twins can be so close to one another that it is unremarkable to see both. When I saw the aura, I was joyous. How blessed to see the aura of my Kaylee on the eve of my birthday, and know how extraordinary the blessings of Deity. I had loved Charity for years, and I was overjoyed to know that she would be my Kaylee. And then, in a moment of clarity, I felt as if Deity was mocking me. The sisters' hands were clasped, but when they separated, I saw the separation as if it was an immense billowing explosion of light. And when it faded, it was Peace who continued to glow for me. She looked at me, and I knew that she knew I saw her aura. Not Charity, the woman I loved, but Peace, I have remained angry with Deity since that moment, the moment I knew that I would make the greatest sacrifice of my life and take peace as my Kaylee, as Deity commanded. Matteo Zakarian, Capitulo 79.
Patriciala wandered along the beach while the tide receded. Across the Purple River lay her father's workshop in the town of Promesa, where he crafted the royal color purple. In Estolia, the abundance of purple marked its uniqueness. Patriciala's father mastered the art of creating a consistent dye, supplying the royal clothier who fashioned Estolia's flags, uniforms, and state outfits. The small, perfect semicircle beach revealed the Willowall cave at low tide. Since age 10, she had gathered discarded Willowall eggs in spring for her father's royal dye. Her responsibility ensured no one else entered the cave. She and her youngest brother inherited their father's tolerance of the Willowall dust. Most Estolians, plagued by sneezing fits within minutes, avoided the cave. Apollyon, immune to the cave's dusty air, shared her rare tolerance. The season for gathering Willowall eggs had passed, yet she continued visiting the cave. The Willowall birds greeted her warmly, inviting her gentle pats and scratches beneath their awkward horned beaks. While her brothers dismissed them as ugly, Patriciala cherished their quirky charm. Her thoughts seemed to summon them, and a loud honking squawk drew her gaze to her favorite woolcock. Surely he was the largest Willowall she had ever seen. Grounded by his size, he waddled to the river for Tarsus snails, though often his willow ends delivered him tasty morsels. He gazed up at her imperiously, clearly expecting a treat. She retrieved a mayberry fruit from her pocket. While poisonous to humans, mayberry fruit delighted the Willowalls. He snapped it up, rind and all, then approached her, rubbing his great horned beak against her leg. Releasing a chuckling noise she recognized as happiness. She scratched under and around his beak, brushing back the extra feathers. Satisfied, he waddled to his favorite perch, overseeing his hens with a watchful eye. The light from the beach dimmed, and she yelped, startled, then recognized Apollyon. Joyful, she rushed to him, wrapping him in a warm embrace.
Tricia.
He said her name, his voice a soothing balm to her nerves as always.
Is it the season to gather Willowall eggs?
He knew as well as she did that it wasn't. She giggled, their shared secret clear as they exchanged knowing glances. The birds rustled in their nests, heads tucked under wings to escape the day's heat. Later, they would feast on Tarsus snails, but for now they remained quiescent. Apollyon drew her close, his hands firm on her hips, his lips melding with hers. She responded passionately, feeling the warmth of his desire against her body, igniting her own heated response. It was akin to the frothing bubbles of the tide in the labyrinthine tide pools along the river's edge.
In less than 3 weeks I will be 30. Will you be my queen, my Kaylee?
He murmured, his breath warm on her ear, his lips gently brushing the sensitive skin just beneath her earlobe.
Oh yes, Apollo, I want nothing more,
she said, her voice low and full of longing. She thought about the beautiful palace and about being the most important woman in Estolia. Her desire to be queen was second only to her longing to be with Apollyon for the rest of her life. Their kisses and caresses grew heated, fueling an ever-building desire. Their entangled bodies sank to the sandy floor of the cave without her noticing. The touch of his strong fingers on her thighs elicited tiny gasps of pleasure and pleading from her. She explored his body with the same freedom as he explored hers. His naked skin warmed her inner thighs, focusing her desire purely on him. A brief sting of fullness paused her passion, but their embrace soon deepened, more intimate than before. The flood of warmth washing through her body brought forth a cry of pleasure from her lips. After a time, he moved away, lying on his back next to her. As his breathing settled, she bit her lip, the reality of their moment sinking in.
Apollo,
She said hesitantly.
You're not yet 30.
Don't worry, Tricia. You will always be mine. Peritasis assured me that it is only a superstition.
He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close as they drifted into sleep, her head resting on his shoulder. The feel of his hand, cupping her intimately, woke her up. When she opened her eyes, He smiled before the expression melted off his face, and he was kissing her. In moments, they were coming together again. She moaned at the sensation of his touch, aching desire for his possession surging within her. She giggled as he playfully pushed her backward into the soft sand, the grains caressing her skin like tiny warm fingers. Then he was kissing her, his thighs hard between her own. She felt delightfully wicked to allow him to possess her in the salty tang of the wild Willowell cave. His voice, a harmonious counterpoint to her own passionate cries, rose in unison with their bodies. She felt a flood of warmth within as he moved above her, their bodies entwined. After he pulled away and used his handkerchief to rinse her off, she did not feel anything like what her mother described when she took her father's soul into her keeping. But, she reasoned, it was unlikely to be as her mother described. The older generation was always over-dramatizing everything. She would not trade the sensations she had just experienced or her future as Queen of Estolia for anything.
Connected hearts defy the old. In our embrace, a story bold.
Where reign is one, no backward glance. In our kingdom, we take a chance. Promises of Zacharias, Estolia's future balancing. Lack of faith would try all of us. Difficult decisions approaching. The last hope for the nation. Alexandros as the last resort. Bemoan's lack of action. It's your choice was...
I once wondered if Mari regretted leaving the only life we knew in Kemet, where I labored as a slave, painting temple walls while her fate as a high priest's concubine loomed. We exchanged that precarious certainty for an uncertain future, journeying to a destination I would only recognize upon arrival. I could never fathom how Mari understood my thoughts so clearly, responding as if my unspoken words reached her heart. But this time was no different. We paused in a small township nestled along the northern coast, where the restless seas of Centrarth stretched endlessly before us, their vastness echoing the unknown paths ahead. She smiled, and her words almost escaped me, for the heavenly gleam of her smile clouded my senses. We were not meant to serve the priests of Kemet, she asserted with quiet strength. We are destined for far greater things. You guide us to the place we must reach. Key, inscription on the petrified old mother tree.
Alexandros pushed his food aimlessly, his appetite lost since his brother's birthday. Tonight marked the final night of Apollyon's seclusion, and somehow Alexandros was certain it was a sham. Powerlessness gripped him as he faced his uncle's apathetic indifference. Most of his peers dismissed the promise of Zacharias as mere superstition. Few believed the old teachings held any merit, if only... His thoughts came to a shattering halt as realization struck him with crystal clarity. For the past 6 days, Alexandros had been lamenting his uncle's indifference and apathy, critical of the decline in the quality of spiritual instruction provided to his peers, scathing in his own mind at the absence of initiative in others, all the while avoiding the task Deity had entrusted to him. His uncle was not the last resort, and his peers weren't in line for the throne. Their lack wasn't the issue, it was within himself. He set down his knife and fork and reached up to his sash, gripping the handle of the dagger bestowed upon him when he became the last resort. Regardless of others' actions or inactions, Alexandros was the only one who could act. Nobody else could stop Apollyon. His heretical actions created the crisis, and the last resort, Alexandros, was the only person who could ameliorate it. He must face his destiny, and Apollyon himself. He got to his feet and pushed the plate of uneaten food away. His brother was in the seclusion chamber in the temple. He would confront his brother, urging him to abdicate. If he refused, Alexandros knew what he must do.
Ulysses and Alexandros, Estolia needed them to persevere.
Alexandros, committed to action, went to the temple to the office of the keeper. He felt a wave of determination surge through him, knowing he had to approach this crucial moment with unwavering resolve. Expecting to see his uncle, Alexandros found Ulysses sitting at his father's desk. A capitulo spread out on the desk in front of him.
"Where is your father?"
he inquired, a note of urgency threading his voice.
"He is spending time at home with mother. What's the matter?"
Ulysses asked, frowning. Alexandros hesitated, apprehension heavy in his chest, and replied,
"We must request an audience with Apollyon and Patriciala. We have to discern their true intentions. As the last resort, I must exercise the authority entrusted to me."
Ulysses studied Alexandros, his gaze intense and unwavering, perhaps recognizing the weight of responsibility on his friend's shoulders. After a moment he said,
"I will arrange for them to meet us in the ceremony room."
Unspoken between them was the understanding that they could not expect Peritasis to do anything, even if he was in the temple, that they had to deal with this together. Alexandros went to the front entrance of the temple. His roving eyes went from Mount Zacharias to the long shadows of twilight dancing across the valley. Though he did not know how he would navigate the night's unfolding events, he felt an overwhelming sense of destiny urging him onward, stirring something profound within. Their peace and prosperity as a nation were threatened, and he alone stood between the forces of destruction and the prosperity promised by Deity.
Seducer of innocence.
Ulysses requests your presence.
An acolyte spoke behind him. With a nod, Alexandros walked briskly towards the heavy studded doors leading to the ceremony room. He paused just outside them and took a deep breath before straightening the frayed sash of office. He squared his shoulders and nodded to the acolytes to open the doors. He strode briskly down shallow steps towards the dais in the center of the ceremony room. The doors opened on the opposite side of the circular space. Apollyon and Patriciala entered the room, approaching the dais from the far side. Alexandros felt as if Deity was giving him strength and purpose, as if his spine itself was being forged anew with Anatolian steel. Regardless of the level of faith and belief exhibited by his father and by his uncle, he was not responsible for their actions or the actions of his brother. What he was responsible for were his own actions, and if his suspicions were borne out, the future of his nation was securely perched on his shoulders. Ulysses was seated on the dais, in the special chair the artisans constructed for him. Alexandros joined him, standing at his shoulder as they both watched the couple approaching. For Alexandros, the smirk on Patriciala's face felt like a bolus of lead sinking into his gut. Over the last 3 generations, the last resort did not bother to use the ceremonial words, asking whether the heir apparent had followed the dictates of Deity and kept the promise of Zacharias. He, Alexandros, would not neglect his duty.
Apollyon Demetrius, heir apparent and descendant of Zacharian, as last resort, it is my duty to ask if you have placed your soul in the keeping of Patriciala, daughter of Catalan, master of purple, from the town of Promesa.
Alexandros felt as if his face was chiseled from stone. He realized now why the ensayos of former queens characterized the last resort in this moment as daunting, even frightening for the future queen. It could not be handled any other way. No matter how much warmth he might have normally felt for the woman who would be queen, he could only focus on his duty during this critical transition of power from one generation to the next. Apollyon put his arm around Patriciala's waist, and he grinned down at her.
Absolutely. I took her virginity.
The power of discernment granted each last resort for this ceremony surged through Alexandros. His brother was speaking the truth.
Did you take her virginity in the time frame dictated by the promise that Zacharias made to Deity, after sundown on the eve of your 30th birthday?
Their expressions answered better than words could. They didn't wait, but they would pretend that she held his soul. Alexandros stepped forward and gripped his brother's right forearm in his hand. Leaning forward, he spoke with the greatest urgency, his voice low and intense.
Brother, you must abdicate.
For a moment, the two brothers seemed isolated from the ceremony room, the acolytes and elders witnessing the event. Even Ulysses and Patriciala all faded into the background. He faced a barrage of memories of Apollyon, taking time to teach him to ride, showing him a hatching willow egg, racing up and down the main entrance stairs to the palace. Apollyon wavered. Then, with a curl of his lip and a firming of his jaw, he moved a half-step closer to Alexandros, and the ceremonial forearm handclasp shifted to a cruel, crushing grip. Apollyon leaned towards him and said,
I am the heir apparent. I am the only one who can say whether you become keeper. Remember that.
Apollyon choices as heir, indifference to animals, evidence he did not care, seducer of innocence.
Queen's crown awaits, as does my king. The future's ours, let the heavens sing. No fear for lore of priests gone past. In love and rule, our legacy will last.
When Zarin brought me the notebook, I was confused. The cover art suggested it was more than 50 years out of date. This was delivered to Hath, Zarin told me. It is addressed to you. The inside cover had pre-printed places where the owner could enter identifying information, name, date, subject, and teacher. Rebecca Strom, September 15th, Algebra 1, Mrs. Colby, were identified. Only about half of the notebook was used, typical 9th grade algebra. The final page in the notebook had a few sentences written in the same childlike script. I discovered today that Emily is not my sister. After Mum was gone, Dad confessed what happened. My real sister was born dead, so Dad took a baby from the hospital. I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't call the cops. I finally decided to sneak onto the Coleman ranch. I wrote her real name on her arm, wrapped her in a blanket, and left her in the stable. At the time, I was sure that she would be returned to her family. Dad never asked about her. Mrs. Colby told us that writing down our feelings allows us to focus on learning. I felt better immediately. I felt a thrill of recognition as I closed the notebook and stared off into space. This was one of the missing clues related to Mother's abduction as an infant. I was glad that the mystery had been solved a few years back, but this childish confession seemed to answer just a few of the remaining questions that lingered. Miracle Zacharian, Inscrito.
A cascade of memories washed over Alexandros, like the night Apollyon scolded Estraeon's wife Marta, while Ulysses lay wounded, missing a foot. They dined on vegetable stew without the usual meat, Estraeon's absence having disrupted the slaughter of the spotted four-horned lamb. Apollyon, disgusted to have no meat, berated Marta, but she was so caught up in the moment and her husband's heroic act that she barely registered Apollyon's harsh words. Other incidents like this crowded his thoughts. The day Apollyon dared him to race along Ankamun's rocky shores. Apollyon claimed victory when Alexandros, wary of the uneven ground, pulled his horse to a stop, valuing its safety over triumph. Riding back, Alexandros noticed Apollyon's horse limping badly. By the time they reached Mount Zacharias, the horse couldn't bear weight on its leg. Alexandros remembered Apollyon's cold decision to have the animal put down, insisting on doing it himself. The memory of Cathea crystallized Alexandros's resolve. During his acolyte year, he stumbled upon her sobbing in the sacred grove. At the time, he couldn't comprehend the scene before him, but years and divine clarity unveiled what his innocence had obscured. Her appearance was disheveled and distraught, her skirts dirty, her lips swollen. When he offered comfort, she accepted his embrace, clinging to him as if time stood still. After releasing him, she placed a hand over her abdomen and said,
"You have helped me this day, Alexandros Martavius."
She then took both of his hands, reminiscent of the tales of past keepers, and gazed into his eyes.
"Your purity of spirit, Alexandros, is beyond price. Use it wisely."
Later, Alexandros learned that she left Estolia for good, driven away by Apollyon. Years later, he learned that she claimed the authority to speak and act on behalf of Deity. Memories swirled in his mind as Apollyon's painful grip on his arm hardened Alexandros' resolve to fulfill Deity's command. He understood the weight of this moment. One day, he would look back, astonished by the peace that would flow through his body, self, and soul. For now, he felt numb to everything but his duty. He stepped back and looked at Patriciala. She saw his stepping away from Apollyon as cowardice, saw his brother as the winner of the confrontation. She did not look repentant. Instead, she had a look of avarice on her face. She coveted the position of queen, and she would lie to obtain it. Neither were worthy of the positions that they had within their grasp. If only Apollyon had been willing to wait to consummate his relationship with Patriciala. To be king was a position with few qualifications, and yet he could not do it. He could not wait to claim Patriciala until his birthday, and he could not accept just her and abdicate the throne to be with her, though Alexandros was certain that his brother loved her. They would throw it all away for a combination of lust and avarice. He gestured to the ceremonial pillows and said, his voice heavy with defeat,
"Kneel."
He could feel the power instilled by Deity in his soul. Apollyon looked at him with a smirk of victory and superiority. He lifted his hands to his head, pulling off the crown of heir apparent before handing it to one of the acolytes. He helped Patriciala kneel on one of the pillows before removing the tiara reserved for the Caeli of heir apparent and handing it to another acolyte. Smoothly, he knelt next to Patriciala, and they both bowed their heads. Ulysses lurched upright and approached where the two were kneeling. With crutches under both arms, he could use both hands to take part in the blessing. He moved with decisiveness to place his hands upon Apollyon's head. Alexandros met Ulysses' eyes, and they had a moment of silent yet profound communication. Ulysses nodded, and his eyes dropped to the sash crossing Alexandros' chest over his heart. Alexandros moved around behind Apollyon, reaching up to feel the dagger within its frayed sheath. Bowing his head, he said formally,
"I, Alexandros Martavius, direct descendant of Zacharian, and second son of the king of Estolia, as last resort have an obligation to Zacharias, to Estoliana, and to all the citizens of Estolia to fulfill my destiny and the role that you bestowed upon me. Apollyon Demetrius, descendant of Zacharian, heir apparent to the throne of Estolia, the promises made by Zacharias unto Deity are the only protection we are given to keep us apart from, and blessed more than the rest of humanity. Only by keeping those promises do the people of Estolia reap the benefits and receive the multitude of promises made by Deity. It is my duty to make certain that those promises are kept, to stand as safeguard should illness or iniquity render the heir apparent incapable of holding his ancestral position as sovereign of Estolia, a duty you yourself bestowed upon me less than 2 weeks ago. Apollyon, as one who has spurned the substance and the spirit of the requirements handed down to you as the heir apparent, and upon your refusal to abdicate, in the name of Deity, I proclaim you unworthy as sovereign."
Tears were tracking down his cheeks as he swiftly drew the blade of the dagger across his brother's throat, praying to Deity that his motion would be true. He felt as if he was two separate men, himself and his brother also. He knew with the clarity of Deity that his brother did not realize what happened. The blade was sharp, his motion true, and Deity had the compassion to numb Apollyon to the truth. Swiftly, to make the pain as brief as possible, He moved behind Patriciala, and with the same motion he drew the blade across her throat. When he finished, he realized only a few heartbeats separated his declaration of Apollyon's unworthiness and the final act against the woman who would have been queen. Apollyon's eyes opened, and his hand went to his throat, unable to stem the flow of blood. He looked at Patriciala and saw the truth of what had happened. His eyes met Alexandros's eyes, and he mouthed the word "brother" before pulling Patriciala into his arms. They crumpled to the surface of the dais. Alexandros and Ulysses both stood on either side of the two, shoulders squared, feet awash in the blood that still pumped from Apollyon and Patriciala's throats and flowed down the steps. The outer doors to the ceremony room swept open. Alexandros felt as cold as the depths of winter. He watched as his father and his uncle entered the room, stopped, and looked at the carnage. At Ulysses on his crutches, Alexandros holding the dagger, both covered in blood, at the 24 acolytes and half a dozen elders surrounding them. Alexandros lifted his chin slightly. He did that which his uncle, his father, and his brother disdained. He upheld the promise of Zacharias. After a moment he looked away from the newcomers and back down to the pitiful bodies.
As last resort, I have exercised my sacred authority to ensure that the wishes of Deity and the promise of Zacharias are always upheld.
He felt his entire body suffused with warmth as Deity assured him of how right his action had been. Peritasis's chin jutted, and he squared his shoulders before stepping up onto the dais within the spreading pool of blood.
As keeper, my duty is clear.
He paused and looked down at the two bodies for a long time before switching his attention to Alexandros.
So long as you keep the promise of Zacharias, you, Alexandros Martavius, descendant of Zacharian, are now the heir apparent.
He saw one of the acolytes holding the crown and held his hand out. Alexandros bowed his head to allow his uncle to place the crown upon it. His uncle unpinned the sash of the office of last resort from his shoulder and hip.
Ulysses Anatoli, descendant of Zacharian, will you serve as your cousin's last resort from this day forth until he has fulfilled the promise of Zacharias?
Ulysses' voice was powerful, and there was not a man within the ceremony room who did not believe that he was fulfilling his true destiny.
I accept the office of last resort. I pledge my body, self and soul to upholding the promise of Zacharias, and I promise to always place the needs of Estolia above my own.
Peritasis looked deeply moved by what his son said.
Upon sanctification of your marriage, you will take over from me as the keeper. It is to be hoped, my son, that you will keep it with greater purity than I have done.
Alexandros felt once again that profound wash of peace he knew came from Deity. While wearing the sash of office of last resort, he had served Deity and Estolia. He had fulfilled his duty. Had Apollyon kept the promise of Zacharias, then Alexandros would have served as his first consul, and once married as keeper of the soul of Estolia. But he felt far greater peace and purpose in the position of heir apparent than he had ever felt as last resort and future keeper. When he married and his Kaylee sealed their union with a son, he would become king of Estolia and serve her well. He would moreover work with Ulysses to make sure that this never happened again. He did not wish for any of his descendants to have to make the same decision he made on this day.
Connected hearts defy the old. In our embrace a story bold will reign as one. No backward glance. In our kingdom we take a chance. To see his brother's life cut short, the dagger and day's blood stained. Apollyon's choices of impatience and youth, lost to his follies, he finally saw the truth.
After meeting Morgan's large family, Returning to Estolia felt like a relief. His countless cousins and siblings created a world of chaotic charm. Later, when Maximilian was born, I delved into the mysteries of the lost of Estolia. The Luc Dumaine family seemed at odds with the prophecy, puzzling me deeply. My uncle Theo stepped in to clear up the confusion. He explained that in every generation, a few foresee their path diverging from the Estolian Way and choose never to return. These self-aware souls know their future lies elsewhere. The lost of Estolia, however, refers to those who departed during a leadership crisis, right after Apollyon. Cassiopeia, Luc Dumaine. Inscrito.
After 9 years in Palmyra, Cathea had woven herself into the fabric of the town. Gannet helped her master the language, and her speech was nearly flawless. Most people had no idea she was a foreigner, interpreting any inconsistencies as typical of the shades of meaning common to Septinatro and Divinatra alike. Her son played with his friends, practicing for adulthood, he solemnly claimed, when he would slay dragons. She remained in the cave home she and Gannet created on the mountainside. As the light into the cave dimmed, she glanced up from beside her fire. Her hand instinctively moved to the dagger strapped to her inner thigh.
I seek Cathea,
the man said. She knew that voice. It belonged to one of her favorite uncles. Sliding the dagger back into its sheath, she sprang to her feet and raced across the spacious cave to embrace him.
Estolian?
She said, a smile spreading across her face. He held her close and warmth flooded her, as if recharging her soul with the touch of an Estolian. After a long moment, she drew back to meet his eyes.
Are you here without your Kaylee?
He nodded, grimacing slightly.
She understood my need. I'm here only for the day, tasked with making strategic trades and bringing you news and supplies.
Who tasked you with bringing me supplies? She
asked.
Ulysses sent me,
he replied.
He insists you need the information and supplies I have for you.
Peritar's son?
She asked. In the following minutes, she absorbed the news of Ulysses' terrible injury and her uncle's pivotal role in saving his life. As he recounted the recent events, she listened intently. A sudden, piercing sensation, one of the ways Deity communicated with her, made her aware of something deeper.
What do you think and feel about this incident?
She inquired after he finished his tale.
I journeyed to Palmyra on the Crown of Estolia, our largest ship,
Estolian said, his voice tinged with sadness.
Nearly 36 close in age to Apollyon joined me to leave Estolia, permanently.
She pondered the implications. It would be easy to lump her in with those who left due to Apollyon's actions. Without a doubt, this was a pivotal moment.
With so many leaving Estolia, rumors are inevitable,
she remarked, a small smile forming.
Rumors won't harm Estolia. They'll simply lead to more avoidance.
Estolian shrugged. After a pause, he asked,
Will you come home now that Apollyon is gone?
No,
she replied promptly, her voice unwavering.
Deity is with me, uncle. I am certain of this. My purpose and place are here, even though the man who held my heart has left this life.
They conversed for another half-hour before he reluctantly said,
I must return to the Crown of Estolia. Is there a message you wish to send to your family?
She embraced him again and said,
I will speak my truth when the time comes. I'll write an inscrito to be sent to Estolia upon my passing. Until then, I will tend to my needs, those of my son and Estolia.
From Palmyra?
He asked.
From Palmyra,
she replied firmly.
I shall live and die here, my son.
Her thoughts raced with visions of his future, mingling sorrow with solace, success with sadness. He might never tread Estolia's shores or know Deity's blessings. He would be Uriah, son of Cathea, his lineage traced until a daughter was born, destined to hold the soul of the king of Estolia. Swallowing the weight of this vision, she continued,
My son will call this place home. He won't know Estolia. This is Deity's will.
Alexandros acted as Deity commanded him, fulfilling lost promises, trimming the diseased limb.